I'm Harvey Teres. I teach English at Syracuse University. I'm Director of Judaic Studies as well, and I've really kind of devoted my career to public intellectual work. I've written 2 books about it, and I've always been interested in connecting the university to the wider world in my work. I've been part of the Imagining America organization and generally the civic engagement movement. So conferences like this, of course, interest me a great deal.
Yesterday we talked a little bit about the Syracuse slides article.
Yes.
And, what is your response to that?
I was more upset with the lousy quality of the article than I was, the issues involved. I wouldn't have minded had that article been an accurate representation of a legitimate debate that is taking place on campus. But it was so one-sided and it was so unprofessional that it didn't really live up to what professional journalism is supposed to be. So I was really most upset about it because of the shabbiness of the piece. As far as the content, I think that, first of all, whether there's a falling off of standards in higher education is an important question. If there is, there are lots of ways to explain that. There are lots of things we ought to be looking at. To link that to a higher number of poor or minority students coming into a campus, I think is not legitimate. I think that might be part of the conversation if it's done sensitively, but I don't think the critics of Syracuse University have succeeded in raising the issue in a particularly good way. I think it's important to any democracy that universities, centers of learning, help to raise the public conversation, the public discourse, distribute knowledge, and help to solve public problems. One of the problems with American higher education is that when different disciplines became professionalized in the late 19th century, they severed connections to the broader public in important ways. And only in small ways has the university tried to continue those older connections or cultivate those connections. We've become too specialized, too hermetic and insular, and we need to reestablish those connections. I came at this from the point of view of literary studies, the point of view of culture and writing. And I want to see, academic literary critics and scholars addressing a wider audience and actually speaking to and speaking about actual readers of books. So that was really sort of my sort of disciplinary interest in all of this. And it's expanded to an understanding that we need, in the humanities, we need to do what is being done in the professional schools as well, while maintaining high standards and critical and independent inquiry as well. I'm not an opponent of traditional scholarship. We need to continue to do traditional scholarship, but also do engaged scholarship as well. Because for me, it's really taking out to the community certain protocols, certain methodologies, certain kinds of expertise, and linking our expertise with the expertise that we find in the communities. And we mustn't lose sight of the fact that we do devote our lives, and generations have devoted their lives to understanding the world in certain ways and by doing certain things to gain that understanding. And that's where sort of the traditional mode of inquiry and independent mode of inquiry is something extremely valuable, and that's what we're bringing out to the community, it seems to me. My recent book that just came out, The Word on the Street, among other things, talks about some of my own research and teaching that have brought me and my students out into the community. So one of these projects was a Poetry Palooza event at the local mall. We got Best Buy to wheel out a dozen refrigerators, and we made a big circle. It looked like Stonehenge. And we got shoppers to come over and compose poems using magnetic letters on the refrigerator doors. And then we had a contest. We actually we used cell phone cameras to take pictures. We also transcribed each poem. And then I had my students helped organize that, and they were there the whole day. And then we had contests for adults of different age groups and also kids. And my students from my 20th Century American Poetry course, they judged the poems that were written. We had almost 100 poems. And so my students not only gained the extraordinary experience of working with the public, and they got a sense of the public's interest in and love of poetry, but they also had the experience of having to judge the quality of different poems. And I don't want to go into a long, disquisition about literary studies, but we don't really, in English classes, we don't really talk about the quality of work anymore. We don't talk about beauty or aesthetics, which I think is unfortunate. So my students had to actually make judgments about literary quality and literary value. And because they had the responsibility to choose the best poems, they really went at it with a great deal of seriousness and specificity. And I thought it was a really great educational experience for them. So I have a chapter of my book called Reading Simic in Syracuse. Charles Simic was the poet that we were introducing to the public. It was part of the One City, One Book campaign in Syracuse. And that kind of started this whole Poetry Palooza project. So, I think that was probably my own most successful experience of civic engaged scholarship. I make a case for it, but I certainly don't feel as though this is the only thing faculty ought to be doing. I mean, the way we approach it is we want faculty members to be able to gain tenure, to get promoted by doing a whole bunch of different things. There ought to be a range of scholarly approaches to getting tenure and to getting promoted. And so there should be traditional forms and there should be non-traditional forms. So we're kind of making a place for publicly engaged scholarship, making sure that it gets rewarded and not ignored or really not discouraged. Now, that doesn't mean that we demand everybody doing this kind of work. I'm perfectly comfortable having some of my colleagues, many of my colleagues, doing traditional scholarship without any direct relevance to surrounding communities or problems that the public may be facing. And I would be really worried if we were requiring all students or all faculty members to be doing that kind of work. My advice is to get to know their campuses really well, the dynamics of their particular department, college, university, and get together with their colleagues who have similar feelings and very carefully plot tactics in a very realistic way, and to respect their colleagues who might be skeptical or who might disagree with them, to engage fully in these debates and not to, and I said this earlier, not to create an us versus them environment, not to trash higher education or trash, American colleges and universities for being too insular, too traditional, elitist. That doesn't work. To reach out and be patient and have civil conversations with people at the highest level possible. And I think that ultimately, if you engage in those kinds of conversations, the strong position of civic engagement will loom large in the end.